Hello my homies. I hope you're having a good old day. Today we look at what older people say their elders used to rant and complain about back in their day. There's a lot more Dungeons and Dragons in here than I would have imagined. Be sure to like and subscribe for more daily coffee and chat. Old people of Reddit, what were elders from your time ranting about? My parents used to tell me how lucky I was to have electricity, hot water, etc. They said only rich people had cars when they were young. Now only rich people have horses. I'm poor. Have horse, am more poor because of horse. I have no regrets. The bands that I got into trouble for listening to, Van Halen, Def Leppard etc., are now background music at Walmart, the UPS store. My dad once mentioned that it blew his mind that The Clash was played in commercials. And Zeppelin on cruise ship commercials no less. If I can remember correctly, Douglas Adams had a saying about technology. Anything made before you are born up until you're 5 is natural. Anything made from your teens to 34 is revolutionary. Everything made after 35 is an abomination. Any technology, really. I've read some articles about the first bikes. People were worried that biking would destroy the environment, the high speed would make people unable to see nature so they would turn out uncultured. Oh, and women on bikes was immoral. Actual doctors argued that biking would shake the uterus loose. One of my husband's relatives is like 70-something, and she's a very nice lady, but she is vehemently against D&D. Supposedly, as it was explained to us, she believes that you have to do some kind of satanic ritual to bind demons to your service so they make you get good dice rolls and make your character do well. Honestly, that sounds way more exciting than D&D actually is. I'll have her know that my warlock has a strict anti-demon policy. Fae packed all the way, baby. I'm in my early 50s, so I guess that counts as old. Don't watch so much TV. I could only watch half an hour of TV a day, so I'd go to my friends' houses after school where their parents weren't so strict. Don't sit so close to the TV. Go outside and play. You've been on the phone for an hour. You just saw your friends at school. Get off the phone. Edited to fix mistake, half an hour of TV, not half a TV. Be nice to an old lady, okay? I'm lucky if I can remember my own name some days. The phone one definitely resonates with me. Now, my kid FaceTimes his friends for hours at a time, and, when my husband complains about that, I just look at him and tell him how much time I spent on the phone with friends when I was 12. Same things as always. Young people have no work ethic, bad music, and too much sex. If each generation kept having increasingly too much sex, what generation am I in? Sad face. Well, current adults, 30-40-ish, are actually joking about how kids are lame, for the first time in decades. They still complain they're doing some things wrong as is tradition, but younger generations are mocked for being uptight and not doing crazy shit like the 80s up to the early 2000s. Drinking, smoking, doing drugs, having tons of sex. It might statistically be true, but a lot of those aged adults laugh about it. Kids are lame. It's not their fault, of course, but I feel terrible for the Gen Zs. Like Michael Phelps, probably smoked weed one time after years of training, hard work, and constant drug tests, and of course some asshole puts the video on the internet. If everyone carried a video camera around when I was a kid, we'd all be in jail now. Kiss. They were knights in Satan's service. Satanic members with their devil music. It's like light rock now, lol. It's always been weird to me that people think Kiss is heavy metal or hard rock. They had AC/DC in the 70s and 80s, that's way harder than Kiss. It makes no sense to me. Maybe it was because of the outfits and the makeup. And the nicknames. One is literally called the Demon. Clutches pearls. Rock and roll and Elvis hip gyrations. Speaking of which, my nana told my dad and I the other day that she didn't like the Beatles because they were hippies, and, worst of all, drug addicts. Not role models, she told me. Now Elvis. He was a good boy. Nana, but Elvis. Nana. No. He was a very good boy. No drugs. But he did, so many drugs. Dungeons and Dragons would cause a psychotic break. Background to the myth was rather sad. The psychotic break idea started because of the disappearance of James Dallas Egbert, which became a media frenzy and got fictionalized into 2 novels by 2 different authors and then a made-for-TV movie starring a really young Tom Hanks. Egbert was nearly a child prodigy. He started college at Michigan State University at age 16. One day he disappeared, the press took an interest, his family hired a private detective named William Deere, and Deere both found Egbert and told the press that the kid had a psychotic break while playing a D&D game. Deere was lying. He was lying for the best of reasons though. What had actually happened was Egbert had tried to commit suicide. He was at least 2 years younger than any of his classmates, which was stressful in itself. Adding to that, he was also gay, and the Midwest in the 1970s was not an accepting place toward LGBT people. Egbert had gone down to the tunnels beneath his dormitory, which was part of a connecting set of basements across several university buildings, taken pills, which didn't kill him but kept him asleep until after his disappearance was already all over the news. He really didn't want to face the media, so he went to hide in a friend's house in either Texas or Louisiana, accounts vary. At this point the private detective Deere found him. Out of consideration for Egbert's health, Deere made up an explanation to keep the press away from Egbert and hoped public interest would subside. The opposite happened. This caught the public's imagination and became a phenomenon. Deere held his silence through the novelization and the TV adaptation, then published his explanation with apologies in the 1980s. Deere's timing was again for the best of reasons. He didn't want to muck up again and draw any more attention to a profoundly depressed young man. He also made a promise to Egbert to keep silent. Egbert committed suicide at age 17. Deere did his best to set the record straight after Egbert's death, but the game was stigmatized in the public imagination by that time. Egbert wasn't a LARPer and there's no hard evidence he ever played D&D. There had been a gaming magazine in his dormitory when he went missing, and gaming options were really thin in 1979. That and the fact that he had gone lost in the tunnels were it. Incidentally, by the time Deere published in 1984, a different, equally tragic, equally specious, and even more lurid scandal had connected D&D to Satanism in the public imagination. Edit. For more about the second fake scandal, science fiction writer Michael Stackpole burst that bubble in 1990. He released his report in full and it's still available online. TL, DR teen suicide, child abuse, satanic panic. Edit number 2. An observant Redditor has corrected my error about Egbert's age. Also, he was a sophomore at the time of his first suicide attempt. He was 3 years younger than his university classmates. Since the satanic panic aspect has generated numerous comments, here's a thumbnail version. In 1982, a teen named Irving Pulling committed suicide by shooting himself. Irving lived in Virginia and had no contact with James Egbert. Irving had been an avid D&D player. After Irving's death, his mother Patricia Pulling insisted that her son had killed himself after being targeted with a satanic curse through a D&D game. Pulling was not a reliable narrator. She later claimed in a press interview that 5% of the population of Richmond, Virginia were active devil worshippers. What she didn't broadcast was Irving's history of enduring child abuse. Patricia Pulling founded an organization called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, BAD, published anti-D&D pamphlets that circulated especially among the evangelical community, and obtained a private investigator license. By the end of the decade, when Stackpole checked out Pulling's claims, she was giving pricey seminars to law enforcement at taxpayer expense. Her research was deeply flawed, to say the least. Soon after Stackpole's report, major organizations in the United States and Canada, including the Centers for Disease Control, published findings fantasy gaming is unrelated to suicide. Pulling died of ovarian cancer in 1997 and BAD disbanded. The Egbert and Pulling cases are separate, but they got conflated in the public imagination. 9.1. Yeah, when I mentioned that I play D&D to my deeply Catholic grandmother, she didn't chastise me, but still had this look of worry/disgust on her face. Thankfully, I was playing a cleric at the time, so I explained how I spread the word of God and whatnot to help allay her fears. Pretty sure she's just forgotten by now. The op to this post left a link to read more about this case. It will be in the description, if you're interested. The Simpsons. When it came out in Australia, there was a lot of controversy over Bart being a bad influence on children and, to a much lesser extent, Homer being abusive. Hell, there were politicians trying to have it removed from the airwaves, and that was before that insulting episode where they came to Australia. Yes. It was the same in the UK. I must have been 5 when it first aired here, because I remember my very first teacher telling the whole class we were banned from discussing The Simpsons. She just about lost her mind when we all returned from the Christmas holiday with Simpsons backpacks, pencil cases etc. She might have had a point though. I spent a lot of time standing in the corner for saying don't have a cow, man every time she asked me to do something. Edit, a typo. Madonna being a bad role model for girls, MTV, Crayola colored hair. Yeah, I remember my father being absolutely appalled at Madonna back in the Like a Virgin days. When I was at school, the snobby girls liked Whitney Houston and hated Madonna, who they deemed too tardy. It's pretty ironic that Whitney was always seen as the sweet girl next door who was criticized for making happy pop music in a time when pop became a bit more edgy. And then there was Whitney in her private life. My parents complained all the time that I spent all my free time at the computer and I'd be a beggar and complete failure in life. I'm software engineer for 20 years. And stop using Encarta encyclopedia for your homework. You won't always have access to that, you know. You should really use the 26 books encyclopedia we gave you for your 16th birthday. It was expensive, but you'll need it forever. 12.2 Grunge music. Undercuts. Computer games, pre-internet. Ecstasy. How lazy Gen X were, see Slackers movie. AIDS. Clothing with rips in them absolutely shat them. Wearing hats inside. Not eating every piece of food set in front of you. Skateboarders. Any sort of graffiti. The interest rates on mortgages. Nuclear power. Underwear as outerwear. Wait, upset old people. Why are you talking about things from my youth? Oh. I'm old, aren't I? Our music, hairstyles, fashion, lack of morals, etc. I am an old now myself, but I refrain from getting into intergenerational flame wars with the younger folk. This my group is good, your group is bad. Bullshit gets real old, real fast. Hell yeah, tell M. Not an old people, but Socrates thought writing things down instead of memorizing them would destroy learning forever. And somebody wrote this thought down since we know it today. His student Plato did. What a rebel. I don't think of myself as old exactly, 48, but I remember my grandparents born in the 1910s calling the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, noise. And when I listen to the music from their era it is different, and I feel sad. Their music rap between world wars tried to be happy but always seemed mournful. Like their generations couldn't forget what they couldn't forget. Some folks born in the 40s and 50s changed that in the 60s and 70s. They didn't change the world, but they sure gave us some great music. You're definitely not old. My mom, who I also don't think of as old, is in her mid-50s and her grandfather was born in 1897, a century before me. Her mom, my grandmother, went to elementary school with a girl whose father was a living veteran of the Confederate Army. Thinking about that just blows my mind. Thank you for listening through until the end. I hope these stories made your day a little bit better. See you tomorrow for more coffee and chat.